See, the audio engineer is here to tell me that my microphone is rubbing on the zipper. It's not the first time my microphone's rubbed the zipper. Oh, I guess I just said that, didn't I? Oh, yes. Yes. Well, let's fix this little issue. Let's try that, Mary Fisher. Chris says brutal. Yes, of course. Leave the mix engineer alone. What do I mean by that? What is a mix engineer? So here at FM Studios, I have a recording and mix engineer, and her name is Mary Fisher. So Mary will do the tracking for something that we're working on, and a lot of times she mixes what we work on. And when the tracking is done, then Mary has some work to do just in prepping to begin to mix. And nobody needs to sit in the control room with her and babysit this process. Mary wants to go through and listen to each channel, make sure that they're fine. She wants to create a mix just based off of the raw tracks and see what we hear, and then begin panning certain instruments, or going through and EQing things. There's a long list of steps that a mix engineer goes through to prepare the music to listen to. So what was my experience with that? So I was just out of high school, and I was doing my very first recording project with a band I had made up of friends, and we had 4, maybe 5 songs. I'm pretty sure it was only 4 songs that we. Now that I think of it, it might have been 6. I don't remember. 4 to 6 songs. And American Music in Caldwell had a recording studio upstairs. I don't know if that still exists or not. I have no clue. I only recorded there a handful of times, and I was late teens, early 20s when I was involved with any of that there. So it's been quite a while. The recording and mix engineer, I think his name was Richard Oliver. Man, I'm pretty sure that's the case. Anyway, we had these big dreams of going into the studio, and we're going to record and make an album in one night, which we did do. Very late, long night of no sleeping for anybody, including Rich Oliver. Greg says, I had a demo recorded out there. Yeah. How long ago was that, Greg? Is that recording studio still in existence? I have no clue if it is. At any rate, so we went in and we recorded. We knew the songs really, really well, and knocked out the playing part and the singing and everything. Everybody was well rehearsed. So the actual performance of the material to get it recorded went pretty quick. It was the mixing side of it. So we're all excited, the 4 of us and Rich Oliver. So 5 of us together in this control room upstairs in the middle of the night, and Rich is starting to mix the songs, and we're excited. None of us have been in a recording studio before, and we wanted to know exactly how it worked in the process. And here, this guy whose patience must have been unbelievable to deal with 4 late teen, early 20 guys sitting on his shoulders, so to speak, and asking, can you make this louder? Can you make that louder? Can you make this louder? Can you do just 4 people constantly at them nonstop for hours until, I don't know, 6 a.m. rolls around, and now we have all these songs are mixed. At least to us, they sounded great, and we were done. And so then what? Well, now we need a copy to take home and enjoy. so now Rich is being asked by people just living on adrenaline at this point to run some copies of these cassettes, which he did happily for us. And I remember getting home. It must have been 7:30 in the morning, and my parents are up and getting breakfast going, and I'm totally wiped, but I'm happy because we made this product in one night. It was super cool. I would never ever do that at this point in my life. Greg says, where are my glasses? 2004, so I have no idea. It was a lovely little room, though. Yeah. I'm sure it was probably different to some degree because it was brand new recording studio when we went in there. We weren't the first band to record there, but the studio was pretty new at that point. So after that, I had little recording projects I did with different bands. I think I may have recorded there once or twice. Again, we didn't make Rich stay up all night to do those projects. We just left him alone to do his thing, and when he had a mix done, we would get it, and he would wait for our approval, and we would maybe ask for an adjustment in something, and like important things like the drums overall need to be louder, things of that nature. Because I'm a lot younger then, and I'm just thinking about myself. And that's true. I was just thinking about myself. So there used to be another recording studio in town. It was called Eclipse Recording Studio that Marco Savage had been running and was recording and a mix engineer there. And Marco had played keyboards in a band called LA Calling in the late 80s, early 90s here in Boise. Very popular band at that time. Marco since passed away a few years ago. I believe he had some kind of cancer. I'm not really sure. But I think he got sick and he just kind of removed himself from the scene and all of that. So, yeah, Marco was an incredible, great guy and a good friend. And so I was playing in a band called Shout, which was kind of a offshoot of LA Calling. And so we had done some recording there, and I wasn't really sup, Thomas? I wasn't really involved with the mixing of that stuff, but our guitar player at the time, Chris, spent a lot of time with Marco mixing that stuff. And then I would come back later and listen. Midline ended up recording there too and doing a bunch of demo work before we had done a full album. Our In for a Quick Garden record, which Scott Pergandy had recorded and mixed. So I think that was working with Scott Pergandy was the first time that it was requested by a mix engineer to go away. Go away and leave me alone so I can work on this mix, and when I have something that's ready to present to the band, then I will let you know. That at the time for me seemed strange. I understand it now. But at the time I didn't understand. So like I mentioned a few minutes ago, when Mary gets ready to do a mix, she wants to just be left alone so that she can listen to what's happening and begin the mixing process. There's editing of drums that happens. So part of that, I'm not going to get too heavily involved with that, but take a drum set, for example. In here, when I use my whole kit, I think we have 15 drum mics that are or microphones that are live picking up drums. Mary says, and I don't want to hear people eating or slurping drinks. This means me, people. She doesn't want me to come into the control room with my coffee and a bag of chips where I'm that she hates those sounds even when she's not mixing. She says anyone. Yes. At any rate, so drums. My drums have 15 microphones on them that are live, and they're all recording the drum set. And let's see. I can't see. This is where I need my glasses because Thomas Schuster is here. Coffee is 10% better and stronger if you slurp it. By the way, if I slurp my coffee right here, there's a microphone right there. I'll try to be quiet in my consumption of coffee. Anyway, so you have all these microphones going, and in some of those, they're recording a bunch of stuff until that drum gets hit, and then so you want to go through and edit all of that track, mute it or get rid of it because it's adding to them. At any way, Mary says there sure is. I don't know what she means by that exactly. Something I said. Anyway, Midline recording the In for a Quick Garden record. Once it was all tracked, that's when Scott Bergandy just very politely and kindly said, or hinted, okay, guys, I'll let you know when I have something ready. In other words, get out of here. So he could work and do his thing and be left alone. He doesn't need the drummer or the singer or the guitar player, bass player in a volume war over their instrument or an EQing war or effects suggestions or any of those kinds of things. The mix engineer needs to be left alone to do their work. And, we're starting to experience that more and more as our studio gets busier. And I know there's some people on here that have their own recording studios or have a lot of experience in the recording world. And it could be boring, quite honestly, to sit around and watch a mix engineer do their thing. I know the process. I've been around it a long time. I'll just leave them alone and let them do their thing. Now, I don't always leave Mary alone because I'm very excited for my wife who's learned all of this stuff in a relatively short period of time and is putting out really great sounding mixes. And she's always researching and watching videos to improve her game. Like she always wanting to improve. And I think that's should be the case with anybody in their line of work, is to constantly be in a teachable, coachable frame of mind to be better and better and better at what you do. And so the better you get at what you do, then the demand for your services continue to go up too. And it's enjoyable for that person as well to work on something and sit back and listen and go, yeah, I like that. It's pretty cool. As long as I've played drums, I always want to play drums better and better and better, and try to be creative and put a really great performance together, and enjoying, and also recording and having that as preserving those moments for eternity. It makes sense to watch a lot of that. But all these DAWs are similar in how they work. So if you're using Pro Tools or if you're using Logic or any number of those different DAWs, the principles are still the same, even though maybe the way you navigate around them are a little different. But by and large, they're very similar in how they work. So one that we were enjoying watching recently was Bob Clearmountain. And Bob Clearmountain is a mix engineer, and we started paying closer attention to him because he mixed for Tears for Fears, and specifically the song Woman in Chains, which we had done a collab cover of Woman in Chains by Tears for Fears a little over a year ago, and I had recently reshared that. So it was me, Scott Alexander from Dishwalla on bass, James Lancaster on guitar, Mary sang, and Jake Reynolds sang the male vocal part, and then Mary did all the keyboard programming, and Mary did the tracking, and then Mary did the mixing, and Mary did all the video production for that too. So Mary ends up carrying a lot of the load, the workload, to accomplish these things, and that one was so. Anyway, Bob Clearmountain had mixed the original version of that. And I had watched a video of Bob with Warren Hewart, who does Produce Like a Pro, and Warren Hewart has a stellar resume too of mixing for different bands. And I think he said that he mixed Woman in Chains in like less than 3 hours. Like he did it very, very fast. And then we were watching another interview with him with two guys who were they were doing this interview with Bob Clearmountain, and they're just like, it's almost like chickens pecking at him, because they were just like, what about this? What about this? What about this? Like his opportunity to even answer those questions were very short, because he would start to answer, and then one would interrupt that thought with another question. And it actually made me a little uneasy watching this interview because of just the bombardment they had of him. But it came down to when they were asking what his process was, Mary says those guys were amped up. Yes, they were. They were. And Bob Clearmountain's an older gentleman too, so he's very calm. He's very relaxed with these younger guys, just like, what about? But he ended up saying, he's like, if we were in an actual mix session, I would kick you the F out of here. You wouldn't be here bothering me, because he has his workflow and the things that he does. And they started getting really into some technical questions, which Bob Clearmountain just said, I don't know. I just mix it until it sounds good to me. That's like, he doesn't have all this. He's not into, not that he doesn't know different frequency ranges or has this process or doesn't know anything, but some of the stuff they asked him, he's just like, I don't know. I grab a reverb, I put it on, I pan this over here, I do this, and very, very simple minded approach to his mixing process. But the number one thing is that he just wants to be left alone to do his job. Now, can you request from a mix engineer after the fact to make some changes? Absolutely. You should be able to do that. But if you leave the mix engineer alone and let them do their work, it would be like if I had a mix engineer sitting next to me while I'm drumming, and as I'm drumming, they're tapping me on the shoulder. Can you do this instead? Can you do this instead? Can you do this? Like I can't even complete a thought drum-wise because I'm being interrupted by suggestions. And a mix engineer doesn't want that happening either. I do bug Mary more than she probably wants to, just because I get excited for her and what she's learned and what she's doing, but by and large I know that she wants to be left alone, uninterrupted, to be in her thought process and do her thing as well. And a lot of times, if I know that she's just needs to work, I'll leave her alone anyway. So she has a lot of patience with me, specifically. So there you go. Um, oh, and Mary says, and perhaps don't ask for a mix when the engineer isn't ready yet. Yes, that is also true. Um, we're experiencing all kinds of things because our studio is relatively new, and a lot of times the people that are recording here, sometimes this is their first time in a recording studio situation. So like I was when I was young, I was very curious too about the process and wanted to watch and be part of that. Um, Mary says, "Send me what you got so far." Yeah, those are. I think most mix engineers aren't sending off roughs necessarily. For example, Midline is getting ready to record a song, and last week we recorded. And we knew this wasn't the tracks; it was just something that we could listen to throughout the week to hear what we were doing and where we needed to improve. It had nothing to do with a quality mix. It was we just have a way nicer version of putting a cassette tape in a boombox and hitting record in the room, which I did that for decades doing that. And when iPhones came along, you would use the audio recording feature and wrap your phone in a towel and stick it in the corner of the room, and your band would play along, and then you'd have like some kind of reference to work off of. So yes, last week we recorded. Anthony sang in the control room because Anthony just needed a music version of what we were doing so that he could work on vocal stuff throughout the week. So yesterday we recorded again, this time with Anthony's vocals in there to kind of evaluate ourselves where we were in the process. So in that situation, that's where we recorded something. We're just capturing a live rehearsal mix off of the board, and Mary may have put a little bit of treatment on it and emailed it. So it's just something we can, but we're not going back to going, hey, Mary, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you blah, blah, blah. So let's go back to Midline for a moment and working with Chris Collier, who I mentioned earlier in this that, he's mixed the last two Midline songs. And he's got a great body of work, a great resume. John England, good to see you, man. Hope you're doing awesome. So with Chris Collier mixing, when we did Ghost, which is the song we released last summer in June or July. I think it must have been July. I want to say we filmed the music video like the beginning of June. Anyway, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, and then around the 4th of July, somewhere in there, we released the song and the video, and then the beginning of August, we had that show at the Knitting Factory. So, see, Greg is weighing in, and he has his own recording studio. He says, I usually only send rough dailies, no effects, no EQ. That way there are no unreasonable expectations for the mix. When musicians hear what is there unprocessed, they tend to be more self-aware of what is actually there. Yep, there's that. So with Midline, we've been in this game a long time, since 1990. So that's been a while, 34 years. We know how the process works. We know how we work, and we know what we want to hear. It's pretty straightforward and simple. Did it start that way? No. but we learned and moved along, and so here we are. At any rate, with Ghost, we tracked the drums here. Scott Alexander played bass for us on that song, so he tracked bass from his studio. And JB recorded guitar from his home studio, and Anthony also did vocals over there. So Mary took all those tracks and compiled them and prepared them to send to Chris Collier, so that when Chris received them, they made sense, that they lined up. the information was clear. That's the other thing when you're sending tracks back and forth with another studio or another engineer, is to be very, very clear in your communication, so that there's no mistaking on what is what. Everything is in a order that makes sense, common sense. You don't have like a kick drum and then a guitar and then a vocal and then a snare drum. Everything is in an order, in an orderly fashion, and more or less standardized from studio to studio. That, you're sending stuff from here to there, and nobody's snickering behind your back going, "Oh, they don't know what's going on." So we sent the tracks off to Chris, and we had a mix back very quickly because Chris has his workflow, and I had a phone call conversation with Chris prior to him mixing, and I said, I think I sent him a different midline song that had been mixed by Scott Pergandy, which Scott Pergandy's kind of out of that game now. He still does some stuff here and there, but anyway, he's on to doing other audio things. So sent him that just to say, this is what the band sounds like, and Chris sent this mix back, and we were all really impressed and happy with everything that he sent, that we had no changes. It was a hole-in-one. It was a home run for the band and for Chris. So that was a really great, very efficient and fast process, because we did what we had to on our end. We did Chris did his thing. We weren't going back and forth, on second thought, if you could do this or that or the other. So it was really great the way that worked. And then when we did Onward, our process is very similar. Now we have James Lancaster in the band playing bass, and James did bass from his studio. Again, Mary compiled all the tracks and prepped them to send to Chris, and away we went. So with this next mix, we ended up having 4 different changes. But the changes weren't, can you change how the kick drum sounds or the snare drum? The first mix that we got back, the whole overall mix was just so overwhelmingly loud. And if you guys are in the mixing world, you hear of these volume wars that groups have. So this volume was extremely up there, and so that was the first request. That was just so loud coming in. It made it hard to just listen. And so when I messaged Chris about that, he's like, "Oh man, I totally forgot I had this thing engaged," or whatever it was, some technical thing. I don't remember. Mary said it was hitting the limiter too hard. Yeah. See, she knows what she's talking about. I don't. So yeah, that was the first thing. So once I brought that to his attention, he was like, "Oh yeah, duh, that makes sense." So sent it back, and then so we just had I think it was 3 small changes. One is I wanted the cymbals a little bit louder in the mix, because I was doing some cymbal work, and I knew it was there, so I could hear it, but I don't think that the general listener really could hear what was happening, and I didn't want that part lost in what was happening. The other request was to bring James's backing vocals up more in the chorus, and then there was a little vocal thing that Anthony did at the very end of the song, and this was just like a taste thing more than anything, is we wanted that last little vocals, kind of a spoken vocal thing, to be lower in the mix, like it was somebody talking from way back behind you. So I sent that off to Chris, no problem, boom, sent it back. It's exactly what we want. But nobody was micromanaging the process. So you got to leave the mix engineer alone. Get out of there. I'm sure you could compare that to a lot of different jobs. If you hire somebody to paint your house, let them paint your house. Then once they're through, go back and see if it's to your satisfaction. You don't have to micromanage every square inch of the painting job to ensure that they're doing a good job. So yeah, leave the mix engineer alone. Let them do their job. Let them do their thing. I know of a couple mix engineers I've heard stories of anyway, of when they are finished with the mix and then the band has a request to change something that upsets them to some kind of a certain degree. Yeah, that's I mean, ultimately we are working for the artist, and so if you're working for the artist, then you need to deliver on that. I see my old buddy Mike Favela is here. Mike, how you doing? I hope you're doing great. Mike is an old friend from way back, and he's an amazing musician and bass player. And I think Mike would agree with everything that I'm saying. Yeah, you got to let everybody, do their job to the best of their ability, and then once you have this thing done, then you could critique that and make small changes in what you're doing. I would also say that when you're having a mix engineer work on something, if you've heard any of their prior mixes, that might give you an idea of what you're going to receive for your band as well. However, here's a good example, like Motley Crue's Motley Crue album that has John Corabi singing on it. That's personally my favorite Motley Crue record. Not anything against Vince Neil, and I don't want to go down the track of he can't sing these days or whatever gets stirred around. I have no interest in that. Talking about the sonic quality of that record with John Corabi, I believe that's a Bob Rock recording and mix that Bob Rock did. We know Bob Rock from Metallica's Black Album. The sonic qualities of that record are, in my opinion, just incredibly stellar. And Tommy Lee's drum sound on that is huge. And of course, Tommy Lee's drumming is immaculate on that record. Every hit counts. It's very cool. So I kind of used that drum mix as a benchmark for me, so to speak. Realizing that I'm not Tommy Lee, and I'm not in Motley Crue. I'm Fred Rock, and I play in midline. So I need to make sure that the sonic qualities of what I do and what midline does is what we're doing. But when I want to reference something, like even if Bob Rock had mixed these new midline songs, it's not going to sound like that 1994 Motley Crue record because we're not Motley Crue. And that was something that was brought to my attention from Scott Pergandy, is that, I guess I'm trying to just be clear, like if you're going to hire a mix engineer, to listen to some of their work and go, oh, they did great for this person, they did great for this band, they did this stuff is all really cool. I would like to work with them too. But I know that in my mind, my stuff's not going to sound exactly what these other groups sound like. All it does is give me confidence in working with somebody that they're going to do the best for my project, if that makes sense.